Hey guys, welcome to That Florida Feeling. I hope everybody's had a great week. Hope everybody's doing good. Thanks to everybody who's interacted with the social media pages. You guys are great. Super awesome. I know I tell you that all the time, but I truly mean it. I will always thank you for helping make this podcast successful. I really, really didn't think it would do this well, and so I'm always grateful that it has, so thank you. Also, shout out to the Unfiltered Studios. I'm part of that studio, and it is an amazing studio, and there are some amazing podcasts on there, some amazing people. So definitely check out the Unfiltered Studios for some other podcasts. I mean, you can find a wide variety of topics. I think I was trying to say wide and range there. But you can find a wide variety of topics for pretty much anything you're looking for. You're probably going to find it on Unfiltered Studios, and we're always adding new people. So definitely check it out. I am proud to say that I think 15 of the podcasts on Unfiltered Studios are in the number one on their charts on Good Pods, which is pretty awesome. So congrats to all my other podcasting people. Congrats. We're doing it. So I think that's great. Thanks to everybody who participated in the polling question. Apparently more people are beach people than pool people, but I guess some of us, it just depends on the day. Also, apparently a lot of people like Robin Hood, and I can't believe I forgot Rescuers, so thank you, Tracy, for adding it. I do love Rescuers. I did not like Rescuers Down Under. Sorry. If you're wondering, I was watching a Disney movie, and I was like, anybody else like the forgotten Disney movies? So that's where that question came from. Again, thanks to Jen for having a conversation with me last week. It was super fun to have you on. You're welcome back anytime. It was really great to talk to you about the Florida State Parks. I hope your trip was good, and I can't wait to see the rest of your adventures. They're just awesome. Don't forget to check her out. She is Florida on Foot. It was really cool to talk to her. So this week, I am going to talk about something that really ties into the week. This is National Park Week. I know it's pretty much almost over because it's Friday. But if you took advantage of it, which I hope you did, you could get into most national parks this week for free. It's not over yet. There's still I think 1 or 2 more days left. So run now. Check it out. There are actually quite a few in Florida. You've got the Biscayne down south. You've got the Gulf Island National Seashore and the Panhandle. You've got the Castillo and St. Augustine. There is Big Cypress National in Southwest Florida. So Florida is full of its national parks. If you're looking for one here to visit for free this today, or maybe I think it runs through tomorrow, maybe even Sunday. But even if it's not free, it's just they're fun to check out. But I am going to talk about a national, well, it's not really a park, it's more of a preserve that is in Florida, and one that is kind of overlooked. And I'm not going to lie to you, I have been to this place, and I actually didn't realize that it was a national preserve until I was done exploring it and leaving. So that just tells you how much I paid attention when I went. And I am actually talking about a ecological and historical preserve here in Florida run by the National Park Service, and that is the Timucuan Ecological and Historical Preserve in North Florida, that is run by the National Park Service as well as in conjunction with Florida State Parks and the city of Jacksonville, because it sits kind of right outside of Jacksonville. It is a really amazing place. The preserve is one of the last unspoiled coastal wetlands on the East Coast, and it is home to over 6,000 years of history set in amazing habitats such as salt marshes, coastal dunes, and hardwood hammocks. The preserve sits on about 46,000 acres of wetlands and waterways and other habitats that are in northeastern Duval County. And no, I'm not going to say Duval any other way. The preserve is also home to Fort Caroline National Memorial and Kingsley Plantation, both of which held their own type of history. The preserve was officially established in 1999 by the Preservation Project Jacksonville. And like I said, it is run by the National Park Service in cooperation with the city of Jacksonville and Florida State Parks to oversee the preserve and other historical areas. They also do work with a couple of other areas to cooperate. So a couple parts of the preserve coordinate with other parks, and it's a really interesting area because there's a lot of history and there's a lot of trails and there's a lot of wildlife. And it's really cool to see a bunch of different agencies and groups come together to preserve such a large area and to show that it's so culturally important. So the Timucuan Preserve is definitely a great place to check out. It is definitely a place to learn about Florida's history, as this is really kind of the place that Florida's history pretty much almost started. Now, the preserve is named for the Timucuan Indians, who had about 35 chiefdoms throughout northern Florida and South Georgia, and they were around at the time of the Spanish colonization of Florida. I'm also going to say the French, because that'll come into play in a minute. The Timucuan were mostly an agricultural tribe. They would hunt and gather, but they relied mainly on agriculture. And they all spoke dialects of the same language, which is why they're grouped into a Timucuan tribe. But they were not united in any way. They did not see themselves united in any way. That is why these 35 chiefdoms were each of their own entity. They did occupy over between 19 to 20,000 square miles at the time of the Spanish arrival into the New World. And their population was around probably 200,000 between all the chiefdoms. And of course, we know what happens when the Spanish comes in. They bring disease, they bring war, they bring things. And unfortunately, the Spanish and French came in the 1500s. And by the year 1800, there was probably very few of the Timucuan left. So few, in fact, that they were incorporated into either the Seminole or the Muskogee Creek tribes. So they were around for a very, very long time. And again, thanks to the Spanish, they were sent along their way. So why do this preserve? Well, really, it's because it's to remember how these people lived and to save their stories, because this is an integral part of the history of Florida. This is Florida before Florida was Florida. And what's really cool is the University of North Florida has really done massive and extensive archaeological excavations in this area because they wanted to learn about these 35 chiefdoms, and they were all each unique in their own way. What really cool thing they found is that they actually discovered one of the second oldest potteries in the United States that dated back to 2500 BCE on Black Hammock Island, which is in this preserve. The oldest was up closer to the Savannah River in Georgia. They also excavated artifacts from the Mocama tribe, which were a Timucuan group, and their chiefdom actually extended from the St. Johns River to St. Simons Island in Georgia. So this is more of the Mocama tribe was more of what you would think of as Jacksonville itself. That was the tribe that would have called Jacksonville home if Jacksonville had existed back then. Archaeologists also found the remains of a Spanish mission on Black Hammock Island. They believe it to be San Juan del Puerto. It is also one of the oldest missions in Florida that they know of. This was established during the 16th century, so Spanish arrived in 1500s. This is probably one of the first missions that was founded in Florida to really reach out to the Indians. And of course, the area also had Franciscan brothers as missionaries to the Timucua and Gual Indians along the coast that reached the Sea Islands in Georgia up to the Savannah River. So they really didn't just stick to this one area. They did, of course, move around as missionaries do. Now, the preserve is made up of different areas, and it does cover a lot of acres, as I said. But of course, it is to preserve the history of the Timucuan people and the Mocama people. But it also preserves history now. It preserves history from the 1500s. It preserves history from the 1900s. So it's actually a really interesting area because it really shows those 6,000 years, and it really has preservation from, you can see the different timelines. Now, the first area I really want to talk about is kind of like the heart of the preserve. It's really the part that really is what you think of the nature and the outdoors. And that is the Theodore Roosevelt area. And that's really 600 acres. And it's a hardwood forest, wetlands, and scrub vegetation. And this is a really cool area to hike through. The area really supports both water and land animals. It has miles of trails, and it even has ancient piles of discarded oyster shells that kind of give a clue about the culture that was there before us. Now, the area was actually donated by Willie Brown. He wanted it to be preserved, and there's actually a Willie Brown trail. And on this trail, there's actually a bird observation platform. And it's really cool because the trail is about a mile from a parking area. And on this trail, it's a pretty easy trail compared to other trails that you can hike through in the area. But you go out to this bird observation platform and it takes you above the marshes, and it really allows you to look out for miles above the wetland. And you can just take in the wildlife, you can take in the flora, you can take in the fauna, and you can really get an overview of this area. You can see really a spectacular view of the untouched lands and almost sense of what it looked like back then, before the Spanish, before the French, before Jacksonville. And you can kind of see why these people wanted to call this area home. So it's a really cool area. The Theodore Roosevelt area, there is a couple different hiking trails. You can go on the National Park Service website and find it. They have maps that you can print out. There is also a visitor center for the Timucuan Preserve, and they have maps there as well. I definitely recommend getting a map because since part of it is vegetation, it can all look the same, and I would hate for someone to get lost. But I definitely recommend the Willie Brown Trail, as it is only about a mile from the parking, and it does take you to this observation platform, which does give you a really different view of the preserve, because it takes you above the preserve. Another spot in the preserve is Cedar Point. Cedar Point's actually kind of a popular one. It lies at the south end of Black Hammock Island, which is the island I was telling you about where they did find a lot of the artifacts and the oldest pottery. So they do know that this area was definitely inhabited and has a lot of importance for the people who lived in this area. And of course, it has seen a lot of change since the Timucuan called it home. The area has been home to the Timucuan, a Spanish mission, a plantation, and even a fish camp that has called this area home. So it's very popular for a reason. Now, Cedar Point itself is about 400 acres, and it is a mixture of upland hammocks, salt marsh habitats, and waterways. And they are both, of course, land and water. The point is part of Seven Creeks Recreational Area, and that's another one of the areas that does work in conjunction with the National Park Service to really preserve the area. Cedar Point's a really cool area if you want to go see like birds and wildlife. This is really a place for like great outdoor adventures. You can actually also see ruins and history along the way. There are a lot of trails on Cedar Point. Again, you can download the map off the website. And these trails will actually take you through the preserves. You can either walk under shady hammocks, you can go through open spaces, or you can even walk along the beaches. This is kind of a cool, this is what makes Florida so unique, is that you will go from massively tall trees to a pristine beach in the matter of, a mile. The paths that you can walk on might have also been used by the Timucuan Indians or the Spanish missionaries alike, as these lands have been much unchanged. You can also choose from many different trails depending on what view you want and what level of comfort you want. Now, if you're not into hiking, and some people aren't, or you just wanted a short walk, then this is also another place to go for water activities. Cedar Point's a really good place because you can go fishing, and there is a wide variety of fish. You can also launch a boat into Horseshoe Creek. Kayaking and paddleboarding, though, are probably the most popular at Cedar Point, as it allows you to explore the salt marshes. Kayaking through the salt marsh estuaries or even paddleboarding is probably the most popular thing to do here, because it really allows you a different look at both the wildlife and the birds in the preserve, really from a water level. Now, of course, salt marshes are victim to time and tide, so be sure if you do choose this, you are aware of the tides, as they do change every 6 hours, and if you go against the tides, you will have a very, very hard day. Just keep that in mind if you do choose to kayak. And of course, you can find all this information as well on their website, or you can check out the visitor center, or even at the recreation. They have some information there as well. So say you're not into complete outdoor adventures. That's okay. The preserve has something else. The next area is less nature, more glitz and glamour, and a lot more history. And I am talking about the Ribalt Club. The Ribalt Club sits on Fort George Island. The Ribalt Club was built in 1928, and it was a resort to end all resorts at that time. The resort was the place to be. The club is actually on the National Register of Historic Places, and it really is a monument to the bygone era. It is a resort, the resort era, the wealthy and the famous, the originating of the snowbirds. This club was built as a wintertime recreational resort that offered its members hunting, fishing, golfing, tennis, and yachting, to name a few. And it was very popular in the Roaring '20s, but of course, membership declined as Depression hit only a year later. And of course, the club was forced to sell its property. Talk about just building at the wrong time. And even though a few tried to make the island into a residential area, a lot more people knew that this needed to be saved for its national and cultural heritage. So they succeeded. The club eventually became part of Fort George Island Cultural State Park in 1989, and it is now in partnership with the Preserve. So it works through the state park and the national state parks through the Preserve. You can visit the club. It is only open on certain days, but it is an absolutely beautiful memorial to the bygone era of the Roaring '20s. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's a really cool place to go around and look when it's open. The grounds are immaculate, and it's really an interesting look at history back then. Another part of the preserve is a well-known one, but it's also a darker one, and that's going to be the Kingsley Plantation. And the Kingsley Plantation is one of the well-known spots. It is actually a beautiful spot. The plantation has a story just like many from the 18th and 19th century. Zephaniah Kingsley came to Florida to make a fortune after obtaining land and establishing a plantation. He originally established a plantation in Laurel Grove, which would be today Orange Park on the other side of the river. He then moved to Kingsley Plantation. He came to it. It is on an island, and he came to it in 1814. Now, Kingsley's wife, Anna Jai, came as well. The fun thing about Miss Anna is that she is actually from Senegal. She was freed by Kingsley in 1811, and he married her, so she was a former slave. She was active in the plantation, and she actually managed the plantation as well. She also acquired land and slaves that also worked the plantation. Now, the plantation, when it was originally built, though, occupied all of Fort George Island. So you're talking about a massive plantation. This was a plantation to end all plantations. There's a reason these people made money. Unfortunately, they didn't make money in the right way. The Kingsley built their plantation up with enslaved workforce, and they had around 60 people working. I'm not even going to say for them, that just had to work. And they grew Sea Island cotton, citrus, sugarcane, and corn. And of course, as they grew this plantation, they decided to acquire 4 more major plantations in northern Florida. But this is the plantation that they called home. This plantation is also extremely significant because it is so well preserved. This plantation has a huge historical and archaeological significance because a lot of slave cabins do not exist to this day. Once the emancipation hit, they were destroyed for obvious right reasons. People didn't want a reminder of those times, so they were destroyed. I tried to look up why these weren't. It really didn't say. Nobody ever really said why they weren't destroyed, but 23 of the slave houses do actually remain on the grounds, and they are in relatively good condition for being what they are. You can actually go see them. They did redo 1 or 2 of them. A couple of them still sit in disarray. A couple of them have been graffitied or vandalized, obviously for reason. But this is absolutely an archaeological significant because it allows you to study history from that time. They also discovered the plantation cemetery on the grounds. They have uncovered artifacts around the plantation, such as tools. They even uncovered a full sacrifice, meaning that the people on the plantation brought their religion and their just their ways of life from Africa over to Florida, and they continued them. They also found other daily materials, such as cooking items and other things that they would have needed in their daily lives. They also found 6 graves on the cemetery ranging from elderly to infant. The site is important also because it is the oldest surviving plantation home in Florida. The Kingsley Plantation is an interesting place to go. It is historically significant. It does remind Florida of its past. I haven't been to the plantation. I want to go. I really just want to go. I mean, it's a beautiful house. I just hate the story behind it. I will get there one day, but I do recommend checking it out if you are into history. It's a really architecturally beautiful building. There's a lot of A's in there. Architecturally, it is a beautiful house. It was built very solid. It has withstood hurricanes and storms and time, and it is a really beautiful place. It just has such a dark history. Now, the last part of the preserve is the one that I explored and didn't realize that it was part of the preserve. Because, hey, that's how smart I am. That is the Fort Caroline National Memorial. Now, Fort Caroline remembers for a very, very short period that France, at one time, had a presence in Florida. And I do mean short. 300 French left France to establish a permanent settlement in North America. The settlers actually included a lot of different people, well-off families, people looking for new starts, laborers, artisans, artists, just people in general. They were seeking a new opportunity. There was such a new, unique mix of people. You had Huguenots, Catholics, agnostics, but you had people that just wanted to come to a new area, to call a new place home, that would not be judged and were able to just do something different. So the French landed in Florida, and they planted their colony in the New World called La Caroline. And this was okay until the Spanish realized that that was their territory, because the Spain had always kind of assumed that Florida was theirs, because Florida was kind of like their stopping point along their routes from South America. They would leave South America, they would go through the Straits of Florida, they would stop off in Florida, and then they would make their way on over to Havana or Puerto Rico, or they would end up in Spain. So Florida was always kind of theirs, and they didn't feel that they wanted the French taking over their new space. They also really didn't want them near their fleets of treasure, and to possibly put a new religion into Florida. This was a huge problem for Spain. They didn't like it. They didn't want others interacting with the indigenous people. But the French weren't really like the Spanish when it came to local relations. They actually tried to get along with the Timucuan people. They wanted to work with them. They wanted to learn from them. They wanted to attempt to make it here, so they understood that if they worked with them, they had a shot. And they even actually ended up having some of the Mocama people help them build their settlement and fort. The construction of the actual fort began on June 30th, 1564, and it was made of wood, turf, and dirt. They created a moat to the one side and made defense along the other towards the river, and they used this as a way to get fresh water. Unfortunately, though, we don't know the exact size of the fort because apparently the French weren't great at keeping records, but they were really great at drawing a picture. So there is a picture of the original fort. Now, of course, as the French came into this area, they wanted to explore, much like the Spanish did, and they wanted to search, and they were there to see if they could get treasure. Well, not all of them. Some of them wanted to learn about the land, wanted to learn agriculture, wanted to get a fresh start. The others just wanted the treasure that they had heard about or seen the local people wearing, but then they found out it was from shipwrecks, not where they found it just digging up the land. So the expeditions turned out to be a little bit disappointing after they didn't find anything after so long. Now, as you know, when you don't find anything after long, especially if that's your expectations, morale tends to dip, and that's exactly what happened. Low morale began to affect those not just on expeditions, but pretty much everybody, as the first year was extremely hard. Starvation set in due to basically lack of supplies, lack of planning, lack of the ability to grow agriculture. They broke their agreement with the Mocama, and then they also didn't support the Mocama at their war, so then the Mocamas just stopped helping them. So basically, now they had no way to learn how to use the land. They had no places to get food, because the Mocama really were helping them with food up until a certain point. And now they had nothing. So the French turned to stealing and raiding, and this really just ruined relations even further. So basically, they made it until about August of 1565, so they were going to give up. They were done. They were just we're going back to France. We tried. We gave it a year. That's it. And as they were getting ready to go back to France, they spotted hope, or sails on the horizon. I guess both count. in the form of Jean Ribault. Jean Ribault had sailed from France to the new settlement in the form of soldiers, settlers, and provisions. He had brought it all, and he was ready to help. Well, news of Jean Ribault coming to the New World not only got to the French, but it also got to the Spanish. And the Spanish heard about Ribault going to the new settlement, and this was not good. This just, they had let them stay for a year, and, this was it. Now, you can't bring in more soldiers. We're done. So, when Ribault was bringing 600 men, they were done being nice. So, the Spain sent Admiral Pedro Menendez to rid Florida of the French. So, Menendez arrived and settled in what is now known as St. Augustine. Therefore, St. Augustine is now founded. If you've ever been to Jacksonville or St. Augustine, you know that they are not far from one another, even in modern day times. So Ribault also knew of Menendez's arrival, and he was feeling lucky, so he decided he was going to sail down and meet them. Now remember, on a good day, it might take an hour to drive down, assuming traffic's not that bad on 95 or 1, however you depend on going, and that's in modern times. But Ribault was sailing, and somehow this man sailed right into a hurricane. That's right, he somehow sailed into a hurricane maybe 30 miles south of where he was at. And of course, as he sailed into this hurricane, he was sent south. His ships were scattered, his men are gone, and now Fort Caroline is pretty much undefended. Menendez heard about this in such good fortune, and he marched his 500 men north to attack the weakly guarded colony. They camped out overnight and attacked early the next morning. Maybe 40 people survived and just said, screw it, we're done, and they sailed to France. They were done. They didn't care. They survived. They called it a day. They cut their losses and left. They're going to France. They don't care. 200 people had been there. Now there was maybe 60 women and children that were actually spared. 40 survived and ran. So these 60 women and children were taken back with Menendez, and Menendez went back to St. Augustine. But he heard that some of the French had survived the hurricane and were shipwrecked south of St. Augustine. So what did he do? He marched south and stopped the French from getting back to Fort Caroline. There was over 100 of them, so he killed about 111 of them. He spared 16 because they either claimed to be Catholic or could be useful in St. Augustine, such as masons or other skilled workers. So Menendez thought his problem was taken care of. He put some people in Fort Caroline, took it over, thought the French were gone. His problem was taken care of. But no, 2 weeks later, in the exact same spot, history would repeat itself. But this time, it was Ribault. Ribault had reappeared with 134 men. And this time, Menendez took no prisoners. He had no way to imprison that many men, to feed them, to deal with them. So they were killed on that spot. And that spot is now known as Matanzas, which is slaughter in Spanish. And that was the last time the French would ever challenge the Spanish in North America. But what happened to Fort Caroline? I mean, obviously, we know that it existed, and obviously we have a memorial of it. But what happened to it then? Well, the Spanish took it over and renamed it San Mateo, and they used it kind of for their colony, and they just really kind of used it to help establish missions. But that's really not the end of it. So why did Fort Caroline go away? Obviously, we still have the Castillo de San Marco. Obviously, we still have Matanzas. But why didn't we keep Fort Caroline? Yes, we know it was a earthened fort, but why didn't they build it solid? Well, it's Florida. So you're probably thinking a hurricane, right? Wrong. Vengeance is strong in the French. So strong that 12 years after the Spanish slaughtered Ribault at Matanzas, Dominique de Gorges, a Gascon nobleman, sailed for Florida with 200 men and destroyed 3 Spanish forts, including San Mateo, which was Fort Caroline. He did so, and he became the Avenger of Matanzas. Also, fun fact, he did destroy what was the predecessor to Castillo de San Marco, which is why they built Castillo de San Marco. But that's why Fort Caroline was actually destroyed by a Gascon nobleman who was going to avenge Ribault. Which, I mean, go for it. You know, I mean, he did avenge him. And that's kind of cool that he did sail all that way just to destroy 3 Spanish forts. And good for him for doing so. But we didn't forget Fort Caroline. Fort Caroline is memorialized today thanks to a project from the 1950s. They wanted to memorialize the idea that people came over for freedom years before Plymouth Rock. And that would be those Huguenots. The National Park Service originally actually built this in the 1960s. They built an outdoor exhibit of the original fort in 1964 on this preserve. But of course, Hurricane Dora hit that same year and wiped it out. So it was rebuilt, and that's the one you see today as a full-scale interpretive model that you can visit to see what it would have been like to have a fort in the 16th century and see its defenses. You can actually visit the fort. It's actually pretty cool. I've been. You can walk along the walls, and you can overlook and see the river, and you can see I'm going to call them the spikes, but the timber, and you can see the archways, and it seems very primitive compared to, 30 miles south in St. Augustine of the Castillo de San Marco, but back then it was probably top-notch defense, and it's a really cool replica, and it's really cool that they took the time to rebuild this to remember that one year that France had a foothold in Florida. I definitely recommend checking out the Timucuan Preserve. I mean, you can really find a lot. I mean, it really does talk about those 6,000 years in Florida's history. And there, it's a lot. It starts from the pottery all the way to the Timucuan, to the Spanish, to the French, to the Ribot Club, to where it is preserved today. And you can visit the National Park Service website to find information about it. Now, the one cool thing about this preserve is that it's actually free year-round. So this is the one you don't need to wait for National Park Week to visit. The Kingsley Plantation, the Ribot Club, and Fort Caroline do have different hours, so be sure to check them out. I believe they're closed on Monday and Tuesday, so I think they're only open like Wednesday through Sunday, like 9 to 5 or 9 to 4. So definitely check it out to ensure it's open before you go. The preserve is kind of a hidden gem within the largest city in Florida, so it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you want to escape the hustle and bustle of Jacksonville. But now, it is such a big preserve, you do need to make sure that you're prepared. So take your sunscreen, your water, if you want to look for wildlife, your binoculars, whatever you need to be prepared to actually explore this preserve, doing so safely. You might run into birds, you might run into wildlife, you might run into mosquitoes, you might also run into Florida man. That's right. Florida man roams everywhere here. But today's Florida man is actually also from Jacksonville, and this actually happened a few days ago. I'm actually sure that most of you have already probably seen this video. I think I might even reposted this video on my Instagram stories. But this just really proves that Florida people are just built a little bit different. Mike Dragich calls himself the blue-collared brawler, and for good reason. Mike was at a hockey game and found out that the Jacksonville Police Department needed a gator wrangler. So what did he do? He went to see if he could help. He walked out onto a busy street, hopped onto the back of this alligator, taped his mouth shut, and carried this 8-foot alligator off. All while being barefoot. I mean, I guess he could have at least worn Crocs. But yeah, thanks to Mike, the city of Jacksonville is one less gator. People are safe again. But yeah, if you haven't seen that video, look this up. This guy is insane. And he does it all while wearing cut-off jean shorts and sleeveless. And he's happy as hell while he's doing it. So yeah, Florida man and Florida people just built a little bit different. Thanks for listening today, guys. Do get out and enjoy National Parks Week while you still can. I hope you guys have an amazing week. Don't forget to be nice to one another, guys. And as always, that's your daily dose of sunshine.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.